Okay, so I want to ask you guys a question. How long do you think it took me to prepare that little section I just played for you? Can I have some show of hands with estimation, probably?
1 hour.
1 hour? Wow, that's a little too short. A week? Okay, that's more reasonable. Yeah, and
I was going to say a couple hours, but maybe a week's more reasonable.
yeah, a week is definitely more reasonable. So when I was growing up, one thing that I really, really hated was that people said I didn't need to practice to be able to play like that. People tell me that I'm talented, people thought I was a prodigy, but that is definitely the one thing I'm not. So I started playing piano when I was 3, and that is a picture of me when I was 5 at my first piano competition. And that competition I incidentally won. So when people look at a kid like that, walk up on stage and play a lot of Bach and a lot of Beethoven and win a lot of competitions, they just automatically assume that, the kid up there is probably really, really talented. But what people don't realize is that for me to be able to stand up in front of other people and play piano, I have to literally practice my butt off. So I spent hours and hours every single day in the piano room battling all these physical issues I had with playing the piano, because playing the piano was something that was really hard for me. I have these body-arm coordination problems, these arm-finger coordination problems that I had to work through. And you might just say that I'm playing clumsy, and this is a physical trait I unfortunately inherited from my dad. So, as I was growing up, although I performed a lot, and although I looked really professional in all those photos of all these performances I was doing, I wasn't really doing these performances because I was necessarily good at handling the stage or handling music in terms of piano. The main reason why I was doing all these performances was simply because I loved performing. But sometimes love isn't really enough to get you to make a living out of it. And even though when I was younger, I dreamed of becoming a concert pianist, I had this idea that I was going to go on and play a lot around the world, and that was going to be my profession for the rest of my life. It didn't actually work out like that. So growing up, I realized that this love of mine wasn't enough, and that I probably had to turn to more practical solutions in terms of what to do with my future. And that was how I suddenly ended up with this dilemma. So now that you have a bit of context with how I'm not a very talented pianist and how I have this choice in front of me, I want you guys to imagine yourselves in my shoes. Which one would you have picked? So can I have a show of hands who would have picked the one on the left? Okay, that's reasonable. And a show of hands of who would have picked the one on the right? Yeah, okay, so I can see that the hands up for the one on the right was infinitely less than the hands up for the left one. So these two choices represented, for me, a battle between reality and a dream. The thing on the right was something that I loved doing ever since I was a little girl, whereas the thing on the right is what I could say to be the dream of every Hong Kong's parents for their kids to go to law school. So I get a lot of people who come up to me and said that I should do law. And the main reason is because doing law will obviously ensure a pretty comfortable life. I can probably get a pretty nice house out of a career in law, and maybe drive a nice car and live a comfortable life. Whereas people thought that, if I wasn't talented and if I wasn't going to make it in the music industry, for me to play piano for a living, I would end up like on the streets and performing and stuff. But what I want to tell those people who come up to me to say those things is that you never know. You never really know what's going to happen, and you never really know how your choices are going to be reflected in your future, because this is due to the one simple fact that uncertainty will always exist because we can't predict the future. So when people come up to me and say that, for me to do law, I will have a comfortable life, and for me to do music, I wouldn't do so, I would say that you just never know. And when I was faced with a choice where I didn't know what the future was going to be like, the only thing I could have done was to take a leap of faith. And the leap of faith is literally the only thing you can do, because when we are faced with choices that we don't know the future outcomes of, you only have to follow your heart, and you can only take a leap of faith and do what you love. So as y'all know, I ended up taking a leap of faith with music because I chose music over law. And now I'll explain a bit in why I actually did that. So a lot of psychologists say that all human emotions can be essentially categorized into either love or fear. So love is attraction for something, and fear is aversion for something. So essentially, all of the decisions that we make in our lives will either be based on love or based on fear. So I remember last August, I was talking to my dad about the agonies of this decision I had to make, and he very insightfully asked me a question. And that question was, if I didn't think about all of the uncertainties, if the only thing I was choosing between was either becoming a really good pianist or a really good lawyer, which one would I be attracted towards? And at that point, the immediate answer that came to my head was, of course I want to be a pianist over being a lawyer, because wanting to become a pianist was something that I wanted to do since I was a really young age. But wanting to become a lawyer was a practical interest that I developed because I thought that my dream was probably not possible. So I chose music out of love. And this love isn't for the love of the possible success of being famous or earning a lot of money performing. It's not because of that. This love of mine is simply because I love performing, and I will go on to explain this love. So I realized that performance has always been this really big part of me, and I was reminded of that when I participated in the Junior Baccalaureate competition in 2012 in Salt Lake City. At this particular competition, I had to play in 2 rounds. I had to have 2 performances, and even though my first performance was a complete flop, my second performance was just pure magic to me. When I was on stage, I was playing with such intense emotion that I felt all the emotions I felt of the music was just bursting through my fingertips out onto the piano. And even though that is not a very flattering photo of me, and I probably look like I'm constipated to you, what was actually happening up there was I was so immersed in the music that I didn't care I was making all these ugly faces. So I felt like I felt like I merged as one with my instrument, and through my music, I reached out into the audience, and I grabbed hold of them, and I forced them to feel the emotion that I was feeling. And that was a really, really, really powerful and magical moment for me, because it was one of the best stage experiences I've ever had in my life. So when I came down from that stage, I thought to myself, my life will be so awesome if every single performance I gave felt like that. So I guess the reason I was able to make the leap of faith was because I found something that I desperately wanted to leap towards. And this thing that I wanted to leap towards, it is not, the superficial fame or the money or wanting to become like one of the best pianists in the world. And I don't think that's what I want to leap towards. Through my experience at the baccalaureate competition, I realized that what I wanted to leap towards was actually just doing what I love and being good at doing what I love. So back to the choice of law versus music. I would say that a lot of people would choose law if they were in my shoes because they believed that they wanted to achieve the outcome of having the superficial comforts of a good life with security, and they would dismiss music because that superficial outcome isn't as obvious. But for me, what I truly want to leap towards isn't the superficial things. It's the substantial things that I truly feel passionate about. So I guess what I want to impart you with today with my story is actually, very cliched. And these cliches are probably like phrases you've heard about a lot throughout your life. So stuff like, you have to follow your passions, you have to do what you love, and you have to follow your dreams. But sometimes these cliches are really overused because of the simple fact that they have a lot of truth in them. And it's probably easy for me to stand up here and to tell you to follow your dreams or to live according to your passions, and even easier for you to sit there and listen to all these words and kind of dismiss them after you walk out of the hall. But the thing is, when you have to act out these cliches, when you have to take these cliches and translate them into actions, that's probably the hardest thing you can ever do. So it's easy for you to listen to these words, but it's definitely really, really hard for you to act out these words. And it was really hard for me to make that decision between law and music, simply because there was the gap between practicality and reality. And I chose to take a leap of faith because I am following in these cliches. So to add one more thing to the bunch of cliches I just piled on you, I want to mention Steve Jobs' quote. And that is the legendary quote of Steve Jobs telling you not to settle for anything less than what you love. And I know this quote has been used in a lot of other TED Talks, but I'm still going to use it today because I have my own take on this. And my take on this is that you shouldn't let fear or uncertainty force you to settle for anything less than what you love. And you shouldn't, and this uncertainty that I had to cast away was, so just don't settle.